Okay, buenos dias. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar. Welcome. We're going to be talking about leaving China and sourcing manufacturing from Mexico. My name is Denise Martinez, and I'm the marketing director for Co-Production International. Co-Production International is a shelter services provider. We help foreign companies set up their manufacturing facilities in Mexico, and we also provide support with developing their supply chains in Mexico and sourcing from Mexico. I would like to introduce you to John Hyatt. He's our VP of sourcing. He has 12 years of experience in the industry, and he's the author of the book Essays on Tradition, Ethics, Entrepreneurship, and Commerce of the State. Well, manufacturing in Mexico has been around for 50 years now, even more. We have all sorts of industries in Mexico. We have a lot of experience in medical devices, electronics, aerospace, and automotive industries. A lot of companies have been here for decades, and they're taking advantage of our free trade agreements, our highly skilled workforce that is bilingual and bicultural, and it's now less expensive than China. And I could go on and on about the advantages of manufacturing in Mexico, but we want to address your questions. So without further ado, here's John Hyatt. John?
Thank you, Denise, for the warm introduction. It's so nice to be here. Hope everyone is staying safe under these trying times and everyone is staying at home as best they can. As Denise mentioned, look, manufacturing in Mexico has been of interest, specifically in the United States, which is obviously CPI's main market and Mexico's main export market. Mexico's main export market has been and always will be the United States. There's no question about that. But since the implementation of NAFTA in 1994, and now with new geopolitical events and now the current health crisis, the new trade deal, people have become even more and more intrigued by, what Mexico has to offer, and like we titled this webinar, the name of the webinar is Leaving China, because so many people have been, contemplating the idea for not just for a couple of years, really for decades, about the possibility of migrating manufacturing back to Mexico or back to the Western Hemisphere. And now it seems like we just have this perfect storm. You've got the trade war, you've got COVID-19, you've got USMCA, you've got this national security threat that people are seeing China as, and now everyone just feels like now's the time we've got to do this. But we get, one of the reasons that Denise and I decided to do this webinar is because we get so many inquiries, literally, Denise, like on a daily basis, don't we? You filter some and then I have to do the other filtering or the consultations. And so many people have a wide range of expectations in regards to what Mexico is and what does Mexico offer. Well, labor's cheaper than China. Can't Mexico just do this cheaper? Labor's cheaper. We've got NAFTA, or now USMCA, how do things work? And that's what we want to talk about in the next hour, because in many ways, Mexico is very different than China. Now, the good news, like Denise said, labor costs are cheaper. That doesn't mean total imported costs are cheaper, but there are a lot of advantages to doing business in Mexico and manufacturing in Mexico if things are done right, but it has to be done right. It is a completely different animal than China. You can't treat it like China in any way, shape, or form. If you do that, you're going to get burned. Some of our best clients are people who tried to go into Mexico, just like they did things in Vietnam or China, or even had success in India. Every country has its laws. Every country has its own local customs, its cultural idiosyncrasies. And Mexico is no different. So, and even just because you manufactured successfully in Peru or Colombia, Mexico may be a different animal for the same market. So, okay, Denise, so that's just a little bit of background, and we're going to be delving into all sorts of different things. And I will say something, Denise, if you have a question or something, because I know you get all of these, you're kind of the front line of the company, yes. No pun intended with what's going on right now. You're kind of our front line and you're getting all of these questions in the beginning.
Yes.
And if I hit a topic here in the next few minutes that you're constantly getting a question on, please feel free to interrupt me.
Okay.
Those of you out there, listening and watching the webinar, if you have a question, you're more than welcome to type it on the screen if it's or to put it in the chat. If
In
it's
the chat.
pertinent to, yeah, if it's pertinent to what we're talking about right then, Denise will probably stop me and ask me to answer it. Otherwise, we'll get to it at the end. And if we can't get to it, if we don't have time to get to it at the end, because we'll try and hold the last 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A. If we can't get it to the end, or can't get it at the end, we'll follow up with a LinkedIn call or with a LinkedIn chat. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, or we can talk on the phone in the coming days, or communicate by email.
Yes, but please don't be shy. Do send us your questions and we'll try to respond as many as we can, okay?
Okay, and so you can switch the, do I have control of the PowerPoint, or you do?
I do, but I can give you control.
No, you can,
Okay.
no, you can keep it, it's fine.
Okay.
Okay, so just to give you a little brief background of, of the manufacturing relationship between the United States and Mexico, things really got ramped up. I think it was in the latter half of the U.S. century, the latter half of the 20th century, with the Maquiladora program, where there were products being made on both sides of the border, and this was mostly trade, on just in the border region where Mexican maquiladoras were participating in the manufacturing of products for the U.S. market. Well, things really started to change. That was going on, but really the economic relationship between the U.S. and Mexico was, and we write about this in our book, it was rather intense in a negative sense for most of the 20th century. Mexico was a protectionist economy. U.S. didn't really trust Mexico. Mexico didn't trust the United States. There were tariffs on both sides of the border for most products. And there wasn't a whole lot of trade, nothing compared to what there is now. Well, that all changed in 1980 when Ronald Reagan ran for president and decided that the United States should have a new and open relationship with Mexico. And throughout the 1980s, the United States, Mexico, and Canada began talking, and it took the better part of 15 years, but finally in 1993, NAFTA was signed into law by all three countries, and it went into effect on January 1st of 1994. And that's really the world that we're living under now. And trade has expanded between the three countries, and the manufacturing relationship, specifically between the United States and Mexico, has become extremely sophisticated since the implementation of NAFTA in 1994. Just to give you an example, most of you probably, if you didn't stay at home today, you drove your cars today. Whether you're in the States or Mexico or Canada or elsewhere, for many of your cars, just the car seat, not the whole entire car, just the car seat, most likely crossed, depending on obviously the make and model, most likely crossed the US-Mexico border up to 8 times, adding a part on one side, adding a part on another side, adding a part on another side, before the final car seat got plopped into the car. And God knows how many other parts came from all over the world and all over, the NAFTA manufacturing block before you finally bought that car at the dealership or wherever. These are extremely sophisticated supply chains, and the economic relationship specifically between the States and Mexico is absolutely irrevocable. It's a marriage that there's no option for divorce. I mean, we make things together. So what's causing this now? But going back from there to what happened in the early 2000s is China joined the World Trade Organization, and then a lot of jobs in Mexico went to China because Chinese labor was so cheap. But over the past 15 years, we've seen those jobs starting to migrate back to Mexico or back to North America because of all sorts of problems with the Chinese supply chain or lead times, all of that. And so here's where we are today. Like I said in the beginning, we've got this kind of perfect storm. We've got the trade war and these companies, these American firms that are getting hit by the tariffs. We've got now COVID-19 where Americans are seeing this, and not just the United States. I don't want to just single out the United States, even though that's Mexico's main export and most of our clients are in the United States. But other countries like Canada, like the UK, are seeing the COVID-19 and the dependence on China with the lead times, medical devices. You know, I walked in Walmart the other day to just out of curiosity, and I could not believe the number of pharmaceuticals that were made in China. And I needed something. I needed like a natural supplement, and I ended up just buying it off of Amazon because it was made in the United States. Probably shouldn't have said that, but I did. And so now we have the COVID-19. Now we have this new trade deal that's going to solidify our trade relations. The peso devaluation, obviously talked about reduced lead times, warehousing costs, all of that. You know, companies are tired of going back and forth to Asia. Some of our main clients, some of our clients get off the plane when we greet them in Mexico City or whatnot, and they're like, oh my God, that was so nice to have, a nice hour-and-a-half flight down as opposed to, being stuck in coach for 14 hours. And as you see on the top of this slide, one of the main things that we're going to be talking about today is when sourcing from Mexico, you can't look at it exactly like China. You have to look at it from a holistic approach, and you have to look at the total cost of ownership. And I'll get more into what that entails. Okay, do we have a question or?
For our viewers, let us know if you have if you're facing this type of obstacles that John is mentioning in the comments, okay? Yes, go ahead, John.
Okay, if you want to take it to the next slide. Okay. This slide, please, I don't want you to take it as the gospel. I want you to just look at it. This is just an outline of just some key industries where Mexico is very strong. I think if you take the first and the last one, talking about NAFTA, I think the biggest success for all three countries, the two biggest successes have absolutely been automotive parts and agricultural products. I don't think there's any question about it. Yes, with agriculture, there has been some controversy, like the Wisconsin dairy farmers who have now been granted access to the Canadian market with the new trade deal, and small Mexican farmers that were not able to compete with corn being dumped in from places like Iowa and Nebraska. But in general, automotive and agricultural products have been huge winners for all three countries under NAFTA, and will continue to be under USMCA. Other parts of HVAC parts and assemblies, electric motors, plastic injection molding, metals. Metals can be tricky. It depends what type of metals they are. China does a lot of subsidies with a lot of their metals, and Mexico's not always going to be able to be competitive. Textiles, we've worked several textile projects successfully with jeans specifically, electric wire harnesses, and also a lot of these products, just like in the United States or any other country, are regionally specific. Textiles, a lot of the textiles come out of the northern regions. A lot of the denim comes out of Puebla. Automotive parts come out of the northern regions, but also out of the Bajío region. If you're not familiar with Mexico, Bajío is the region that is the state of Guanajuato and the state of Querétaro, the cities of León, Guanajuato, and several other cities in there. There's a lot of powerhouse automotive manufacturing going on there. And also just automotive final assembly. There's a lot going on in Puebla. Puebla is a town that's mostly textiles and automotive, but it's very good at what it does. So again, Mexico, like any other countries, is going to be regionally specific. Cesar Hernandez just wrote medical assemblies as well. Thank you, Cesar. I'm glad you mentioned that. And you brought something else to my mind. Yeah, medical assemblies are big right where Denise is in Baja California. In TJ, where CPI's central offices are, a lot of medical devices, and Baja is more high-tech manufacturing in general than as
Yeah.
opposed to other parts of Mexico.
Actually, the largest concentration of medical devices in North America, and the number one exporter of medical devices to the U.S. is the state of Baja California.
Is Baja.
Yes.
Yeah, and a lot of that's going on where near our sourcing office in the El Paso, Juarez region as well. But as you said, Baja is absolutely the strongest. There's also a lot of electronic manufacturing in Baja, and I forgot to put something up here. Electronic manufacturing in general in some parts of northwestern Mexico and states like Sonora, it's very strong. So that's just a rundown. Are you reading the comments, Denise?
Yes, I am. We have, okay, so let's, Stephen Mark, he's asking what area of the country in Mexico, what region were you referring to? I'm not sure. In general,
I think he was asking what I just answered.
Okay, good. And also, have you seen corporations already question their medical device and pharmaceutical business run through China, or is it more a projection?
Yeah. Oh yeah. We're doing a webinar about that in 2 weeks because I was invited by we're invited by the El Paso Juarez Medical Device Council, or I can't remember their exact name. We're doing another webinar on that. Yeah, absolutely. If you want to go back to the next slide, absolutely. Excuse me.
What about the wood industry in Mexico?
Wood, that's a good question. Wood is generally not a super strong industry in Mexico, simply because Mexico is not a big wood producer. Mexico does not have tons of forests. I mean, if you remember when Hernan Cortez, I think it was Hernan Cortez, went back to Spain, or one of the conquistadors went back to Spain, and this king of Spain asked the conquistador, what does Mexico look like? He balled up a sheet of paper and then opened it up and said, that's what Mexico looks like, because a lot of it is so much desert. That all being said, we have successfully worked wood sourcing projects, specifically in furniture, where they were able to procure wood from some of Mexico's smaller wood producers, or they were able to bring in wood from Russia, Brazil, the US, or China. But especially in the northern regions, talking about this relationship between the United States and Mexico under NAFTA, a lot of Mexican suppliers have been able to successfully and competitively manufacture wood products by bringing in wood from the US and Canada.
Okay, so we have some more questions, but please continue, and we will address them at the end, or maybe during the conversation.
Because
something that you already have.
Yeah, I want to stop at about 10 till so that we can have at least 10 minutes for questions.
Okay.
Okay, can you move to can we move on to the next slide?
Okay.
Okay, again, we get all of these inquiries about, how can we get into Mexico? What are, we did this in China. We often get, some of the more problematic calls I got when I first started doing this, while I was learning on my own. People would call and say, I did this in China, and they wanted things done the same way. Well, Mexico's not the same as China. It's not going to work exactly like China. Some of the main differences, or you could even call them challenges, is Mexico, there's going to be a lot of heavy lifting and labor hours from the get-go to get a sourcing project up and running. I'm going to explain that in the next few minutes as to the reasons why, and what our added value is, and with our engineering team and all of that. Mexico is what is called a high context culture, where the cultural differences between the US and Mexico tend to be that Mexicans value relationships more. Things take longer to get done. A Mexican supplier is not going to, get things done with you, get the ball rolling without meeting with you probably at least a couple of times. We usually almost always go to visit Mexican suppliers on the client's behalf before, do preliminary face-to-face. They get to know us. Then they want to see the final client who they're going to be doing business with. And they want to get to know them. And I want people, especially in the States, to understand it. It's not that it's one way is right and one way is wrong. It's just different. It's just different cultures. We wrote about this in our book. You know, I had a girlfriend who told me in Mexico City once. She said she was Mexican. She said, "Oh, I can't stand to go to your country because the people are so cold. They're so rude. They don't smile, and everyone just walks in a business meeting and says hello and then starts talking business, and no one says anything personal, and it just makes me feel so uncomfortable." And I said to her, I said, "Betty, it's not that we're not rude. We're not bad people. It's just we're different." And that's just the culture in Chicago, especially in the major cities in the United States. People and in lots of Europe, just people are more get straight to business, and Mexico is a more relationship-based culture. And you know that is going to that you know obviously transpires into manufacturing, and they're going to want to like you, you know, and they're going to want to in many cases take you out and get to know you on a personal basis. And you know it is what it is. It happens all the time. I don't think we rarely take a client to meet Mexican suppliers when the Mexican supplier doesn't want to take them out for some meal. It's just the business protocol in the country. Negotiations can also be emotionally driven. And a big thing, you know, negotiations in the United States, you quote a price. Like I quoted a price to a US client the other day, and he said, "Okay, that's fine. Send me your bank account number." And he just sent us the money. That doesn't work like that in Mexico for two reasons. One, I've never met this client. He's in LA. I have never met him face to face. I've actually never even seen him on Zoom or FaceTime or Skype. He found me on LinkedIn a couple of years ago. We've worked several projects for him. He likes us and he's happy with what we do. You know, in Latin America, a supplier is never going to, you know, you're never going to set up a manufacturing contract by phone. It's not going to happen. And again, the total cost of ownership is what has to be considered when you're looking at Mexico versus China. You cannot, and I cannot overemphasize this, you cannot just look at the Ex Works or the FOB or even the landed cost into your facilities, because in Des Moines or in LA or in, you know, Waco or wherever your final destination of your warehouse or your distribution facility is, you cannot just look at that rock bottom number. You have to look at the total cost of ownership in regards to, and can you go on to the next slide, Denise?
Okay, so we have a question from Veronica. I'm taking the opportunity right now that we
That's
make
right. You can go back. Go
Okay.
back and I'll hit on this total cost of ownership. But okay, we'll go ahead and answer Veronica's question.
Okay, so how should a company prepare for contract manufacturing? What information should I have available? You know, what type of information do you need to get started in evaluating?
That's a really good question, Veronica, and I'm going to answer that in a minute.
All right.
Because that's another huge thing that people think, the way things work in China, a lot of it has to do with drawings. And with the way things work in China as opposed to Mexico, we're going to have drawings in Mexico, but I'll answer that in just a second. But going back to the total cost of ownership, you have to be, the client or the importer has to be considering a myriad of things, including, you know, not just the landed cost, but the overall cost of doing business in China, of the increased lead times and his or her company having back orders or canceled orders because of those increased lead times, increased warehousing costs because you're having to import 1 or 2 FCLs at the same time, as opposed to being able to have a more nimble supply chain from Mexico, where you might just import even pallets. You know, that 14-hour flight that goes back, that 14-hour flight back and forth to China, that is, you know, going to cost you well over $1,000. And if you fly your engineers or your manager's business class or your VP's business class, then you're talking about, you know, $4,000 to $10,000 a ticket, as opposed to like $500 back and forth to Mexico. And you can't do China in less than a week. I mean, you're going to have to be there at least a week to recover from the layover and all of, from the jet lag and all of that. We have clients that come to Mexico on a Monday and leave on a Wednesday. they're out, or come on a Sunday and they have 1 or 2 visits to make in the same city, and then they're back home the next day in whatever city, and they work Thursday and Friday. All of that has to be considered when making this change. You can't just, so many people contact us and say, this is our price in China. Can Mexico beat that price? A lot of times I don't even want to get on the phone with them, because they're just looking at this as, I just went to Walgreens to buy a pack of gum, and now I'm going to go across the street to CVS and see if it's cheaper, and then I'll just buy it there. You cannot look at it this way. It has to be a far more in-depth, holistic way of looking at things. So, okay. Now
that's one of the most common questions we get. And the idea is, for most companies, is that the overall savings of manufacturing in Mexico, it's not only the price of the actual product, but also, the proximity to being in the US, proximity to the US and other aspects. But so there's no way to respond to that question. Should I expect my product to be more or less expensive than China?
Right. I'm not going to the store to buy a bottle of wine. I mean, there are 2 grocery stores near my house here. One of them is like a Whole Foods price range, and the other one is like an Aldi price range. And we go to the Aldi price range for most things, but you can't look at this like that. You simply cannot. And just even things such as, being up until, part of it is just, it may not even be a financial cost, the human cost. People have called us and said, I'm absolutely sick of being up until 3 a.m. every morning with the Chinese, because that's the only time they can talk, because, obviously because of the time differences. Or you just had an employee quit because he or she was tired of dealing with the Chinese, these crazy hours. And then now you have to hire someone, retrain them. We had a client a couple of years ago who said, he came to us and said, you know what? I don't care if Mexico's a bit more expensive. He said, I'm missing my daughters growing up. He's like, I can't put my daughters to bed at night. My daughters mean everything in the world to me. I miss putting them to bed at night because I'm on Skype with Asia every night. I'm too groggy to even wish them off to school in the morning or enjoy their soccer games or things. I miss some of their like band recitals or whatnot in the evening. He's like, this is not worth it to me. I'm getting out of China. It's not worth it to miss, my daughters growing up. It's only going to happen once. So you kind of have to factor in even, even personal, your personal lifestyle.
Okay.
Okay, I see we're getting more questions. You can go on, or if you want to stop and ask.
Well, do you have an estimate of how much of the imported products are migrating back to Mexico over the last couple of years since tariffs started, as a percentage, more or less?
I really don't. I'd have to dig into that. I know obviously certain industries are getting hit or having this happen more than others, specifically steel. It just depends on the industry, and it also depends on the company and if the company is willing, to do things the right way. And getting into that, we're getting into the next slide. Mexico in no way functions like China in that it is a turnkey sourcing process. I'll be honest. I just went and visited my nieces and nephews the other day down here. Saw them at a distance. Their mom wouldn't let me get more than about 10 feet from them. But honestly, they're 15. Well, 2 of them are about to turn 15, and one's about to turn 14. They could source from China tomorrow if they had to. It's that easy. All you have to do is say, like, I have this wine key here. I have this is my case for my iPods, for my AirPods. All you have to do is just show that to the Chinese, and they'll make it for you. You'll have samples within several days. You'll have, or within a couple of weeks, you'll have a price quote within a couple of days. Mexico just doesn't work like that. It's not going to work like that anytime in the foreseeable future. China is turnkey. They do everything for you. It's like walking in to an all-inclusive resort and being pampered and just everything just happens so easily for you. And so we have so many people that contact us, like I said, and they say, well, can we did this in China, and this is how we want to do it in Mexico. And I say, I'm sorry, I can't help you like that, because this is not how it's going to work in Mexico. Mexico is a different country. It has a different, like I said, it has different laws, and it has a different culture. The first thing we have to discuss and decide is is the product going to be a fit for Mexico? And in many cases, it's not. I'll just give you a couple of examples. I was talking to someone, contacted me a couple of months ago. She wanted to do chandeliers, and she was just so pumped about doing chandeliers in Mexico. She wanted to get out of India and China. And you know, we reviewed everything, and there are not Mexican suppliers that could make chandeliers. They could not. We could have helped turn a Mexican manufacturer into a contract manufacturer for chandeliers, but after our fees, tooling, her coming back and forth, I mean, this woman, it would have cost her $250,000 to turn a Mexican supplier into it. And we just had to tell her, you know, it's not going to work. Another example we had, I got this the other day. We got a call from a company in the Midwest. They wanted to make, like, you would get these at like TJ Maxx. This is just a wooden base with glass, and it's spray painted. Says Georgia Bulldogs here because my dad and I went to Georgia. This doesn't say where it's made. It was definitely made in China. And we took one look at it, and just because of the factor with wood and the end finishing, the printing and procuring glass, we told them we can do this, but even with tariffs and everything, it's going to come back probably 2 to 3 times the cost of the Chinese. So, and obviously, go ahead, Denise.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but this is a big question. So
no, you're fine.
Making China sound amazing, you know, now with all these obstacles apparently in Mexico. So why would companies be looking to manufacturing in Mexico? And also, can you give us some examples of good products of to outsource in Mexico? You know, you mentioned in the beginning some of the processes, but can you share some examples of actual products that would be a good fit for Mexico?
Yeah, well, like I said, we had a very successful project we finished up a couple months ago with kitchen and bathroom furniture, and that was wood, even though wood is not a strong point for Mexico. We were able to be successful with that. What other final products? Another good is lighting, like that lamp behind me. That could be a winner for Mexico, based on some of the inputs and raw material. I think that's aluminum. Mexico's generally strong with aluminum, and the aluminum is obviously getting hit by Chinese tariffs. And like I said, all sorts of auto parts. We had an inquiry a couple of weeks ago for, what was it? Auto batteries. The client decided not to move forward because they couldn't bill it back to their client. But it was essentially batteries, or I think battery chargers. So those are examples. Just any type of, like I had mentioned, plastic extrusion, electronic components. We've gotten many inquiries for headsets and earphones. Those are very good. Those are very good. Extension cords, cables. Again, rock bottom price, China is probably going to be more competitive. Some TVs are even coming back to Mexico. As we know, 10 years ago, BlackBerry was made in Mexico. There's talk of Apple bringing some products back to Mexico, but I don't know if that is going to happen or not.
Okay, so we have more questions, but why don't we continue with the presentation so that we can keep a flow, and then we'll go back to the questions. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So after deciding what is the fit, and again, we could talk about that all day. I mean, we could just stay here until sundown, just discussing that. And so the point number 2, and one of the things that, you're kind of paying for when you work with us is the supply market research. There is no Alibaba Mexico. So many people come to us And they said, we've searched and searched, but we can't find anybody in Mexico. And we know that their products we've walked the floor of Lowe's, we've walked the floor of Walmart, we went to Home Depot, and we know our competitors are manufacturing in Mexico because we see on their boxes that it's coming from Mexico, or we've heard it from people at trade shows that it's coming from Mexico, but we don't know, but we can't find the suppliers. There's a reason. I mean, the Mexican suppliers stay hidden. I don't want to get into the details of why. You probably know a bit why, Denise. They just, for many reasons, a lot of businesses like to stay under the radar in Mexico. I'll just put it that way, okay? There are a lot of reasons, not necessarily legal, that they're trying to do things the wrong way, but a lot of times they just want to stay under the radar. Most suppliers that we bring people to, they mostly have English websites. They have not done SEO or PPC or anything like that to be able to make themselves available to new clients in the US or Canadian markets. And so, the first month of most of our projects, after we determine that something can be done well in Mexico, the first month is usually a month of supply market research of locating the Mexican suppliers. Now, we have an approved vendor list of close to 1,000 Mexican suppliers that we have met either at trade shows or have their information from chambers of commerce or things like that we're members of or have been members of or have relationships with. But that, most of the time we're going to have to dig and look through suppliers, their websites, their capacities, what they're exporting, and qualify them. And then, that after we get down to a list of maybe 10 or 20 suppliers, then we go through the RFI process, and we're going to check supplier capacity, if they're export ready. Do they want to do business with the States? A lot of companies in Mexico they're not interested in exporting. As crazy as it sounds, they have a strong local market, and they may tell us they're wanting to export, but in reality, they're not going to want to go through the heavy lifting of possibly hiring more people or increasing capacity or competitiveness. They're just wanting to stay. They're in their comfort zone. And, some of our clients have met some of these Mexican suppliers that were in a comfort zone, and they tried to work with them, and then they ended up wasting a bunch of time flying back and forth to Mexico or trying to call and email to get quotes, all sorts of things like that. The RFQ process is the next. Quotes always come back way off in Mexico. They're always going to come back super high. I remember when I first met you, Denise, Veronica was giving her presentation, and she was like, well, contract manufacturing is usually never cheaper in Mexico. Not based on the initial quote. It certainly isn't, because part of that is cultural, that, the negotiating culture, people start to quote higher in Mexico, but not just that. And that's where if you look at number 5, that's where our real added value of what our engineering team and our Juarez office can really offer you is, after those quotes come back, that's where we have to really go to work, and we have to demand, and we go into their facilities. This is not done by phone. I mean, obviously there is stuff done by phone and email, but we have to go sit down with the suppliers, and we have to work a cost breakdown analysis with them, and look at every aspect of their production. Where are they procuring their raw materials? That is one advantage that China has over Mexico. China gets raw materials from China. Mexico often has to import raw materials from the States or even from the Far East. But we look at their cost analysis, and we find all sorts of problems with these suppliers, even ones that are currently exporting, of how they can increase or how they can lower their costs. And we've had some cases where the initial quote was up to 300% above the target price for the client, and we've been able to get it down to the target price. I'll give you one real world example for this. A couple of months ago, our team was in Aguascalientes on behalf of a client, negotiating with a supplier for zinc. What were they? They were zinc die cast parts. There were zinc die cast parts like for like this door handle here, stuff like that. That's the kind of stuff they made. That's probably zinc die cast. I'm not going to get up and touch it. So we asked them, you know, their quote had come back like 80% above the client's target price. And we asked them, we said, well, where are you getting this, and this raw material? And they told us these suppliers, and we all just looked at each other on our end of the table, like, what is going on here? And we immediately said, no, call this guy, call these people, let us know, let them know that you're calling, that we've recommended them. You're going to get a much better raw material price on, you know, on your raw material with X supplier as opposed to Y supplier. That's one of the things where China has the advantage of over Mexico. China has so many suppliers of raw material. It's just far more of a leverageable market for being able to procure raw material, and Mexico might have 4 or 5. And that's where we can go in, an example of how we can go in with a cost breakdown analysis and bring that supplier, you know, back down to earth to where they can do business with the United States. And there are just all sorts of other factors in regards to just their overall manufacturing, their productivity per worker, just all sorts of things that we're able to look at and working with them and hold their hand to get them not only price competitive, but, you know, making things according to the quality that American companies want and need. And obviously the supplier development is we negotiate prices on your behalf, on our client's behalf, not on our behalf, not on the factory's behalf. We don't receive any type of kickback from the factory. So this is a long-term process. This is like a courtship, like a marriage. This is not, I'm getting out of China tomorrow and I'm going to Mexico and we're going to start production in the next month. It's not going to work like that. It's going to be a several-month process for this migration.
So John, where would you say Mexico beats China? I mean, it's a long-term friendly relationship. Mexico is less susceptible to disruptions because of you know, all the trade agreements, and we don't face those trade wars and those obstacles of the distance.
Right.
You know, IP protections. So what would make
that's a big
Mexico
one. I didn't mention that, IP protection.
And also, since you were talking about the cost analysis, what about the target price? I know that a lot of companies, from the beginning, they say, this is my target price for my product. So how do manufacturers in Mexico go about quoting with a target price?
Well, to answer your last question, you asked me about 5 or 6 questions. So to answer your last question, we usually don't tell the Mexican manufacturer the target price in the beginning because they'll get scared and run away. It happens all the time because the target price is going to usually be, and sometimes the importer in the States or in Canada has their target price 25% below what they can really take, or 30% below. I mean, you know, it's business. We're all trying to negotiate and give ourselves some wiggle room. But usually we don't even show the target price to the Mexican supplier in the beginning. We just want to see what they come back with, because it's happened so many times. We send the supplier asks us for the target price, and then we send it to them, and then they completely fall off the face of the earth. They don't answer emails, they don't answer WhatsApp, they don't answer calls. They're just like, there's no way we can compete with this. We're not going to waste our time. Let's just move on to the next project. So what we do is, you know, we know the target price and we want to see what they come back with. And what they come back with, we share with the client. We're always transparent about that. And then, you know, we start this process of supplier development to see how low we can get them.
Okay, and my other question was, what would make Mexico better than China when you talk about all these points and all these obstacles? I think we need to explain to the audience a little bit of that, you know.
Well, In regards to just the lead times and everything I talked about,
the overall benefits. And we see a lot of companies looking into Mexico. They want to get out of China since the trade war started, and now with the current situation. So what would make them feel safe and comfortable about moving to Mexico and start manufacturing here?
Well, first of all, there's overall less political and trade tensions between Mexico and the US now. I understand there are some political tensions with what's going on the border, but the trade tensions between the US and Mexico are essentially over with now. That whole thing is behind us. USMCA is going into effect. The trade tensions between the United States and China are not going anywhere right now. And the other factors I think I talked about, the decreased lead times, that more nimble supply chain where, you don't want to bring in a warehouse, you don't want to bring in a full container because it's going to take you, for some smaller importers, it may take several months to move that container. They just want to work with, an LCL or, 7 pallets or whatnot. And then that's going to save them on warehousing cost, and again the flights back and forth to China and all of that. It's a gigantic ball of wax as to why Mexico companies want to get out of Mexico. And I'll be honest, so many people contact us and they say, not only are they closer, we consider Mexico, well, there's no consideration about it. Mexico is our neighbor. And we work alongside Mexicans, we shop alongside Mexicans in our grocery stores, and wherever we go, we see them, they cut our grass. We consider the Mexicans our friends. They do good work up here. We'd rather do business in this hemisphere than in another hemisphere. We get that all the time.
Okay, thank you.
From all 50 states too.
Yes. Okay, so let's continue with the presentation and then we'll get back to questions later.
Okay. Yeah, I see we got a lot. I haven't looked at them, but I see we got a lot.
We're getting a lot of questions, but let's move on and leave some time for the questions. Okay.
Okay. All right. And another, why is supplier development so crucial in Mexico? Hitting on the same thing, because in China there are several hundred, if not thousands, of suppliers going back to this door handle here or whatnot, or this. Or this AirPods case, whatnot. There are literally thousands. Like I'm holding a wine key right here. This is a product that could work for Mexico. It's part fiberglass, part plastic, part some type of metal. This could work for Mexico, but for every one supplier in Mexico, there are 100 of these in China, easily. And so the Chinese they have motivation to come back so much cheaper because there's just so much more competition than there is in Mexico. China, partly is because the overall manufacturing system in China is 10, 15 years ahead of Mexico. But the other part is that China is 1.2, 1.3 billion people, and Mexico is 225 million, Mexico is 120 million. So yeah, Mexico's 120 million versus 2.2 billion. So you're looking at approximately just under 10 times the size of Mexico. There is so much more competition. And another thing that Denise, I think, Veronica's question, Mexican suppliers will not work without drawings. They have to have detailed drawings no matter what it is. Whether it's the door handle behind me, whether it's the lamp behind me, whether it's the AirPods case, as silly as it sounds, something like this, or this wine key. I mean, like, you remember we're in talks, Denise, with the company with the dog clip, and they're ready to go because they have detailed 2D, 3D, and CAD drawings. China, again, talking about how my nieces and nephews the other day could source from China. All they have to do is take this and FedEx it over to China, and they're going to have prototypes in, or they're going to have samples in within a couple of weeks. Mexican suppliers, it's just the culture in Mexico. They are going to have detailed drawings. And one of the challenges for people trying to get out of China and into Mexico, your Chinese suppliers do have those drawings. most likely. They've reverse engineered them, but they have them. They're not going to share them with you. Even if they are technically your IP, they're not going to give them to you because they know what you're trying to do with them. They're not dumb. You are going to have to get those drawings reverse engineered. And we have that capability, not in-house. We do the work through other firms, engineering firms that can reverse engineer those drawings within Mexico, but they're going to have to be engineered. Otherwise, we're just going to be reverse engineered. Otherwise, we're just going to be spinning in our wheels trying to get this done. As I said, there are just very few turnkey suppliers in Mexico. There are some, but you know, the supplier is going to have to be developed. It's going to have to be a marriage that walks step by step to get things done. Did you write that? Should cost analysis and selective target price? I'll go back to that.
Yeah, no, that's those is part of the Q&As. So yeah.
Oh, okay. And the last point I really want to hit on, that what we were talking about with the last slide, American firms, all American manufacturers that I'm aware of, they have a manufacturing cost accountant in-house. They're an accountant. They have an accounting degree. They're a CPA probably, and their job is every day. It's a full-time job to go through that manufacturer in Des Moines, I think I'd use that, or Sheboygan, Wisconsin, or Cleveland, or wherever it is. If it's in the Rust Belt, it can be in Alabama or Phoenix or wherever. Their job is to monitor the overall costs of the manufacturing process of that plant every day. And many of them in the United States have entire teams of those accountants. You know, they're paying them big salaries so that everything is as competitive as possible. Mexican suppliers do not have cost accountants. They just don't. They never have. It's just, again, it's not in the culture. I don't even know if Mexican universities offer specializations or degrees. They may in accounting for manufacturing accounting. That is one of the keys as to why the cost analysis breakdown is so important, because again, the suppliers they don't know how much they are overpaying for raw material. They're overpaying not necessarily for labor, but how much more expensive something is as opposed to how much cheaper it could be if they would take a deeper delve into things.
Okay. You want me to go to the next slide?
Yeah, you can go ahead. And I think we're almost done. And then, well, we took a few minutes over, but, you know, just some conclusions. Like I said, Mexico can definitely be advantageous for manufacturing. It doesn't work like China. It's going to take more heavy lifting to get things going. Once things get going, that, you know, you can have a relationship that flows well. It's never going to be turnkey from the get-go like China is usually. And as many of our clients have seen, and when we talk to clients, especially when we talk to VPs and COOs who have this more holistic approach, as opposed to looking at simply the imported cost, you know, they're looking at 2, 3, 4 years down the road, how much more they can be saving through all of this. You know, like I said, the flights back and forth to Asia, the increased warehousing, the overall lack of flexibility in a supply chain when you're importing things from 5,000-7,000 miles away, as opposed to something that a product from Mexico that, you know, when the purchase order is sent out, you know, the plant can be up and running, and once the PO is out the door and packed, you know, it can be in the United States in as little, well, for most of our cases, it's about a week. I don't know, in the San Diego, TJ area, it's probably much quicker than that.
Okay. So in a nutshell, like in steps, so what would be the overall process of sourcing in Mexico? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5?
Okay, first of all, we need to look at the product. We don't need detailed drawings in the beginning. we need to look at the product and tell if it's something that's going to work for Mexico. We've been doing this long enough where we can basically take a quick look and we know. We're not going to take projects that are going to be failures where we're going to have clients, upset down the road. That's point number one. That's the first step. And once we determine that it is something that can work in Mexico, we get into, then we do need drawings. We absolutely do need drawings because if it's going to be a full-scale project, we're going to have them. So then we get drawings, and then supply market research is kind of in the same boat, and request for information. That's all kind of step 2 or month 1 to 2, and then request for quotes in month 2 to 3, and then after we get those initial quotes, that's when the rubber really meets the road, with us having to get into the nitty gritty with these Mexican suppliers, getting their costs down, getting their quality up, getting their efficiency up, all of that. So I'd really say it's a 4-step process. Things usually take about 6 months to get a Mexican supplier up and running to the level of a client's liking, to where they can, say, yeah, we can receive this product at this price. But again, once the work is done, the U.S. importer can, they are going to be able to reap those benefits for years and years down the road, because not only with that overall total cost of ownership savings, but folks, China's going to keep getting more expensive as the Chinese economy keeps growing and Chinese labor keeps growing. It's going to keep getting more and more expensive, and Mexico is going to continue making more and more sense. It hasn't as much until now, but until recent years at least. But Mexico is just going to continue to be more beneficial in so many product lines. Now, that all being said, some things are always going to be made in China. China's not going anywhere, but in certain industries, Mexico is just going to make more sense.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So okay, why don't we jump into the Q&As?
That was my cross-examination.
Yes, so we have a few questions already, but if you have more questions, please send them over. So David Thomas is asking, what services does CPI provide to make the experience be more turnkey for the U.S. importer client? So how we can
well, we make it turnkey for you in that you're going to retain us, and you're not going to really be doing anything except you're going to be on a call with us every couple of weeks getting updates on what's going on, and we're going to have to get your input and let you know. But it's going to be turnkey in that we're going to be doing everything for you. But if you're looking for the turnkey Mexican supplier that we can just point you to and then wave our magic wand and get you up and running, that's not going to happen. If we could do that, I'd probably be making a lot more money than I am now. But I mean, to answer, turnkey, we're going to be doing the heavy lifting for you.
Okay, perfect. So are you able to commence an open book cost analysis before the final selection of a source? Say when you have a screen due to a top 3?
Yes, we're going to get quotes from several suppliers. We're not going to, even though there are less suppliers in Mexico than there are in China for almost every product, our goal is not to choose just one supplier from the get-go and then just put all of our eggs in one basket, because that's asking for suicide in Mexico, and a country where domestic markets aren't all that competitive in a lot of different industries, not just manufacturing. But we want to get as many qualified factories as possible and get RFQs out to them, get quotes, and then sit down with them. And that's usually when you, the client, come to Mexico. That's when you come to Mexico, because that's something, and I'm glad he asked that and you brought it up, Denise, because they're going to come. One of the reasons that the quotes come back high is they know that we're the agents. They know that we're not the final importer, and they don't get serious until they see the gringo on the ground in Mexico. And when I say the gringo, I'm not talking about me. They know that I'm representing them. They want the guy to come in from, from Montana, from Wisconsin, from Illinois, from upstate New York. They want to see them in their facilities, and that's when things get more competitive. Now, after all of that happens, we want to, that all being said, we want to have them in touch, the client in touch with as many suppliers and as many RFQs as possible with good suppliers so that they can compete with each other. And yes, of course, we want to do the cost breakdown analysis with all of them. And we don't charge fees based on the number of suppliers. We want as many as possible, you know, because it's just going to be better for you in the end to win. So if we can find 10, we'll find 10. It's going to be hard in most industries, but we want to have as many of them as possible, like I said, working against each other.
Okay, so we ran out of time. We still have
Is it going to cut
more.
off? I can say.
It's not going to cut off. So if you mean, you're welcome to stay with us through the next questions, maybe 5 more minutes. And
no, I can stay.
Okay, so Jamie is asking us, the USMCA is to be reviewed every 6 years. What are the chances to, the US puts a 25% tariff on Mexico for a now unforeseen reason?
It's every 15 years, isn't it?
I'm not sure.
I think it's every 15. I want to do another webinar on USMCA, by the way, Denise. But I know you guys have done all sorts of other events on that, so I don't know if it'll overlap.
That's always an interesting topic, you know.
But yeah, that'll definitely fill the webinar. But no, it's every 15 years. Look, I can't tell you what's going to happen in the White House in the next 5-10 years. I can't tell you what's going to happen in Los Pinos in the next 5-10 years. For those of you out there who don't know what Los Pinos is, that's the equivalent of Mexico's White House, where the Mexican president lives. Without getting political, the United States and Mexico have 2 very unpredictable presidents. Each have very unpredictable presidents right now. I'm not going to tell you, I don't have a magic wand and I don't have a crystal ball. I can tell you, well, this person's going to be elected in 5 or 7 years and they're going to do this with tariffs. I don't know. No one knows what's going to happen. The thing I will say is that, like I started with in the beginning, the United States and Mexico's economic relationship is absolutely irrevocable. It is going to be the U.S.-Mexican border, and is the busiest border on earth, and as far as commerce and number of people that cross it every day. We're not going to be able to shut down borders and survive. We are not neighbors. We are roommates living in the same continent. So, you know, again, I don't know what's going to happen with this tariff or that tariff or USMCA. I am confident that our countries are going to continue trading because politicians want to get elected, and politicians are not stupid. And if our countries were to try and shut off trade with each other or reduce trade with each other, it would create an economic calamity in both countries.
Okay. So one more question from Robert Najim. What areas is the Mexican government helping develop within the manufacturing sector? For example, PCBs and electronics doesn't seem to be a good option for what I've seen in his experience. So electronics.
This current Mexican government, I don't know if they're helping any manufacturers to develop industries. I can tell you that we work closely with some state government agencies. Specifically, we work with COFOSE, which is basically the equivalent of the U.S. Commercial Service for the state of Guanajuato, down in about 2 hours north of Mexico City, or 3 hours north of Mexico City. Those state bureaucracies are helping to develop manufacturers and to work with them as best they can. Given the current situation in Mexico, there's obviously going to be limited government funds and reduced tax revenues, and tax revenues going to other things as opposed to manufacturing because of COVID-19. That's inevitable. But honestly, I don't know. If I will check and research it with a couple of our associates and partners and see what I find out. If you can just shoot me that on LinkedIn, I'll look into that more to see exactly what the Mexican federal government is doing, but I don't think they're doing much right now.
Okay. Well, we don't have any more questions. Well, there are some questions that we can address independently in regard to more specific type of products and processes and how to start manufacturing. Any other questions? Just you can send us an email. You have my email from the confirmations that I send you for the webinar. And like John said, on LinkedIn. And well, overall, I think China set themselves to be manufacturers, be all in all. What this has created is a dependency for which we are now seeing the consequences, like trade wars, tariffs, and supply chain disruptions. Where Mexico beats China, I think, is in this regard. It's in a long-term friendly trade relationships with North America. I think Mexico is less susceptible to disruptions because of this. And I think Mexico is more interested in having a lifelong relationship with your company rather than bust out just the product and lower the cost, right?
Right.
So if you're interested on starting manufacturing in Mexico, just send us your information, start with some drawings, maybe some pictures, and we can go from there, right?
No,
what would be the next steps, John?
Excuse me?
What would be the first step to get started? You know, because the most common question is, I have this product and I want to start manufacturing that in Mexico. But like you said, it doesn't work that way. So what would be the turnkey solution?
There really isn't a turnkey solution. The first step would be for us to take a look. You know, our team has been doing this long enough to where we can take a look and we're going to know if it's going to work in Mexico.
Yes.
Again, and to answer Kate's question, Kate wrote like 3 or 4 times. Kate Reefers, John, why are you making China sound so awesome? No, I'm not trying to make China sound so awesome, but so many people think because China does work faster than Mexico and they just do it easier than Mexico, and Mexico doesn't work like that. And we want people to be realistic because when we started doing this, we had clients that had their China chip in their brain, and then they retained us and our relationship went toxic within 3 or 4 months, and we couldn't finish things because they were demanding that Mexico work like China. And I just want people to be realistic because I don't want that. We don't want to take on projects where people are expecting things, you know, to work the way they do in China.
Okay. Kate says, thank you. Okay, so let me see, agreement itself. Just checking in to see if there's any other question. How deep do you go into the logistics to move freight into or out of Mexico?
Well, that's a really good question. We have not dealt with logistics in the past, but now we are teamed with a logistics company with offices, with operations in Mexico, the United States, and they can even help with material procurement from the Far East. It's part of the reason when you watch me on LinkedIn, when I post videos on LinkedIn, I always say we're now part of the New Mexico Strategic Sourcing Alliance, and we're allied with this logistics company. So to say I have experience or we have experience in this, the answer is no, but we can put you in touch with the right people or package that in all into one all-inclusive package. Because what we have found is that some clients do want, I guess you can say turnkey, or I would use the terminology all-inclusive, like a beach resort. They want to walk in, they want them to hand them, you know, their key cards to their room, and they don't have to think about anything else. They relax for the rest of the, you know, their vacation. And we have noticed that some clients want that. They don't want to deal with logistics. They want the price, and they want it in their warehouse, and they want us to take care of all of it. So we're moving in that direction.
Okay, good. So just one more question, because this is interesting. Are you able to put us in contact with investors in Mexico to build a manufacturing plant? If I may, with the shelter program, which is one of the main services of Co-Production International, we're able to help you set up a manufacturing plant in Mexico. But usually right, what companies provide is the investment, the capital equipment, the raw materials, and the know-how. So we can help you with the complete setup of the operation, from the legal framework and administrating the day-to-day operation. But I mean, we might be able to put you in touch with investors, but we don't really get involved with that.
That's funny he asked that because another strategic partner and me are in touch with an investment banking firm out of Chicago with operations all over Latin America, that they don't have much of a footprint in Mexico, and they're wanting to start injecting capital into Mexican businesses and acquiring Mexican businesses, or acquiring some type of equity in Mexican businesses. And we're in talks with them because now with the current situation and this rush to get out of China and a possible recession in Mexico, a lot of Mexican manufacturers would be interested in receiving capital or loans to be able to export to the United States. So to answer your question, Mexican investors, no, but we are in talks with the possibility of offering that service through the United States, through an investment banking firm, to help Mexican suppliers, like I said, who need capital and who need to get help getting up and running and to develop their export markets in the United States.
Okay. So one more question from Rob Horton. Do you think there is a pain point like COVID or worse that could give rise to a contract manufacturing culture in Mexico, or bring in the culture from the US?
Yeah, I know what Rob's saying, and my first response, I would love to say, well, that's already happening so much. It is, but I think what Rob's trying to ask is, is it going to ever get turnkey the way Americans want it, to where it's just so much easier than it is now? To be honest, I think it will get easier, and the contract manufacturing culture will continue to grow, but change happens much slower in Latin American markets than it does in countries like the US. I think when companies or things need to adapt in the US, people change rather quick and firms change rather quick. I don't think it's something that, you're going to see in 5 years, 10 years even. The contract manufacturing is just going to be turnkey in Mexico. What I do think you're going to see is you're going to see a lot more contract manufacturing, but there's still going to be a lot of heavy lifting involved.
Okay, and on that note, question from David Scanlon: do you see Mexico being able to manufacture other products when now there are no costs competitive? What is Mexico doing now so in the future they are able to be more competitive? I mean, we are.
I don't know what Mexico is specifically doing now to be more competitive, but yeah, I do think that certain products, as economies and trends and commodity pricing is always changing. Yeah, there are going to be things in which Mexico is competitive, now that it probably wasn't competitive, or is going to be competitive for, or in 5-10 years from now, that maybe it was not. And one of the big things that I'm thinking is electronics. You're starting to see, when China joined the World Trade Organization, electronics in many ways just dried up from Mexico and everything went to Asia. Now you're starting to see that trickle back in. And like I had mentioned, I talked about TVs. There's talks, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal or Forbes, that Apple may try and test some things in Mexico. So yeah, you're going to see certain industries change to where, they say, yeah, we can manufacture this in Mexico.
Okay.
Again, I can't answer the question. I'll research that, but I will look into, and maybe I'll do a post about it on LinkedIn of, what is the Mexican government doing at the federal and state levels to try and ramp up manufacturing.
Okay, perfect. Well, I think it's time to finish. I think we did address most of the questions we have. I have some notes for other follow-up questions that I got, and I've been responding on the chat as well. So, well, thank you everyone for joining us and joining this conversation about sourcing and manufacturing in Mexico. And if you have any more questions, just send us an email. there on the slide, you can see John's contact information and my
You
email.
could put yours too, Denise.
Yeah, I mean, they know mine. They've been receiving a lot of emails from me. I can. So
Okay.
yeah. Yes. Anything else that you want to add, John?
No, I think that's it. I'm glad about all the questions because that means that people are interested. That this is a very pertinent topic. So if we had had a webinar with 2 questions, you know, that would not have been good because all of the participation means that there's a ton of interest out there.
Yes, and you know, overall, I think Mexico, it's been you know, it has a very strong manufacturing ecosystem, and like I said in the beginning, it has a lot of experience with manufacturing all sorts of things. So not only for the big, you know, the key industrial sectors like electronics, medical device, and aerospace, but you know, anything that you can think of, it's being manufactured in Mexico. It's just about finding those right manufacturers that work best with your company, and following that overall process that John just shared with us. It seems like there's a lot of steps, right? And like it takes some time to get in that rhythm and get into those manufacturers that are a right fit for you, but it's something that we can help you with. It's definitely a good opportunity, and there's a lot of advantages of manufacturing in Mexico.
Obviously.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And we'll send you the recording of the webinar so that you can have it, and we'll stay in touch. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Denise.
Thank you, and stay safe at home. And we hope that everything turns out good after this quarantine, and we can get started with a lot of business in Mexico. Okay?
We definitely will.
Gracias, bonito día.
Stay safe, everyone.